Indeed. I'm going to take a seat because we're all relaxed. It's the end of the day. I'm taking you through to the end of the session. This is late night radio.
Bring us home.
Okay. So there's a few elements to this. Firstly, what do we mean by a brand in this context? Like, who should be listening to this talk and why should you care? We just sell NFTs, right? We're not a brand. We don't have to worry about this stuff. A brand in this context is anyone who conducts an activity that would be considered an activity that could be a threat of money laundering. So we're talking about anyone who exchanges crypto for crypto, crypto for fiat, or any permutation of the above. Anyone who custodies crypto, particularly custodial wallets. Do I care if you're decentralized or not? No. Why? Look at UkiDAO. UkiDAO gets looked straight through by the SEC. 4 years of historic action that they looked back to, and they went straight to the individuals behind the DAO. So you should still care, even if you're decentralized. So in that context, we're here talking about any type of brand selling tokens. And tokens in this context, again, super broadly defined in the rules. And people often say, oh, there's no money laundering rules in NFTs, right? There's no money laundering regulations. Yeah, there are. And they capture tokens that transfer value. That is such a broad definition. If you can transfer value with your token, that's a potential crypto asset in that context. And you need to be mindful of that, and you need to be alert to the risks. So what sort of activities might that cover in the context of NFTs? Do you mint your own NFTs on your website and sell them for crypto, or do you sell them for fiat? That would be an exchange activity. Do you hold them as part of the sale process in some sort of custody? Yeah, you'd be caught as well. So there's things that you really need to think about here that really matter. Okay, so we've covered brand there a little bit, but let's look at money laundering itself. So what do we mean by that? What does that cover? That's basically any touching of assets that have been used or could be used to finance criminal activity. It also involves, in some jurisdictions, proceeds of the funding of terrorism and proliferation funding. And proliferation funding, what we mean is the use of money to proliferate nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. So you've got, in that context, any sort of money that passes through your system, through your protocol, through your project, that has been used for one of those reasons, so that you can make it look legitimate when they withdraw from your project. You're in that category of people who need to be concerned about this stuff. So, okay. We've got money laundering and we've got brand, but why should you care? Like, what is the impact of this? There's a few, of course, and we can look at it from both sides of that fence. So, first and foremost, you have on the brand itself. So, in some jurisdictions, if you do any of those activities that are considered to be money laundering risk activities, the ones I've described, then you would have to register with a local regulator before you can do those activities. And it doesn't matter what the underlying assets are involved in that activity. If you have a business relationship that involves you exchanging crypto for crypto or crypto for fiat, then you would need to be registered in that jurisdiction before you could do the activity. So that means that unless you're properly registered and authorized, you can't even sell your tokens. You can't even do your project. You are literally hamstrung until such point as you're properly registered. It also means that, as our compere rightly said, if you do anything in that with those funds, if you are caught with the proceeds of terrorism, with the proceeds of criminal activity, with the proceeds of proliferation financing, you could go to jail, right? This is serious. This is a criminal offense. Now, the next obvious question then is, how on earth do we detect this, right? Like, how on earth do we know? And how good are we at doing that? And the answer is, frankly, terrible. So, again, 2 layers. The first one is on the project side. In the UK, which is where I practice law, I'm a regulatory lawyer in the UK, 85% of firms who apply to the regulator get rejected to be authorized to do their activities. And the reason they get rejected is because they can't show the regulator that they have adequate systems and controls in place to identify and prevent money laundering from happening within their protocol. Which which is terrifying. But then on the other side, you have this whole industry of people and systems and controls that have been designed specifically to stop this, to address this point. Projects that have money laundering reporting officers, compliance officers coming out of their ears. And it is fairly well understood that the effectiveness of all those controls is about 1%. So even with all of that in place, that whole industry is just a small trickle that's stopped of the entire amount of money that gets washed through criminal proceeds in a system. So that's the real implication here. You have got a very real likelihood of touching proceeds of crime, particularly in crypto. I've seen some of the Chainalysis maps. Most transactions are about 2 transactions away from some kind of money laundering activity. How do you detect it? How do you know? And that's a rhetorical question, but it's one that I don't even think I know the answer to fully, because you've got to look at things like, are there unusual patterns of behavior with the transactions? Is there a wallet that's putting loads of money in and immediately taking it back out again? Or are there wallets that have slowly dripped proceeds into you but suddenly do a big transaction? It seems out of character for them. These are the sorts of things that are very hard to actually just quantify as rules and require a great deal of investigation. But if you're a protocol that's got transactions, hundreds of transactions a day, how are you ever going to keep on top of that? That would require an army of people to look through that. And you can have automated triggers all you like, but those automated triggers are only as good as the thresholds that you set. So identifying it is phenomenally difficult, which makes the effectiveness phenomenally difficult. So, okay, how do you protect your brand then? How do you stop this from happening to you? What does good look like? And what the regulators would say is, it's a risk-based decision-making process. You have to be able to identify what risk each transaction poses to you, what risk each buyer poses to you, what risk each client poses to you. Quantify that somehow. Give it a risk score. Figure out then how you can mitigate any potential risk identified by that client or that buyer or that transaction. Put those mitigation steps in place and then show how and why you decided to act on it the way you did. If the risk score is above your risk appetite, a risk appetite statement is something you should all have in your projects. How much risk are we prepared to take with respect to money laundering? And in fact, any risk, customer risk, product risk, client risk, geography risk, any of those things. How much risk are we prepared to take? Is this risk beyond our level of appetite? Do we therefore automatically reject it? Or do we send it to the board? Do we send it to the money laundering reporting officer? Do we send it to the compliance officer for sign-off? That's something you need to be thinking about. So it should be risk-based, but it should also be holistic. So can I see the context of this transaction or this client or this person in the overall business that I'm operating? What does that mean? What would it mean if I accepted this transaction? What is it in terms of its total volume to my project overall? Those are really serious and important questions that projects don't think about enough, and they should think about more, because the implications are, as we've seen, terribly serious.